know everybody here. At least that's what I felt when I was there with you outside. One after the other, people coming to meet you. And I should also say that you're extremely approachable, and that vibe goes across and I think pulls people to you. Tell me, how did you get to where you are today?
Lots of perseverance. I mean, nothing happens without that. So, background is when we started electric, that is way back in 2000, way too early. Uh, didn't work. 2004 didn't work. 2007. Even then, I mean, part of my family would, though they believed in me, but they didn't believe in the concept. And so the whole concept, the whole thing was that, is it really going to happen? When is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? And now we can see it happening. We can see the whole transition happening to EV. It may take its own time, it may take its own course, but nevertheless, we can see it happening. The only way this can work is perseverance, because so many companies came and went, and it's not purely because of financial reasons. Some of them are bigger than what we were, so they would have invested more than what we did, but they pulled out of the market, and we yet continued. And the second thing is, of course, having a great team. Mr. Gill was just here, who's our CEO. He's been with us for about 10, 11 years. Gave up his cushy job to come and work with the startup at that point of time and lend that support to building this organization where we are now. Our dealers, I mean, we've got dealers who are now 12 years old. And when I meet them, actually, and ask them, that what made you stick there? So they say, sir, your confidence. We thought, that if you believe so much in it, if you're investing so much, that we would do the same thing. And these guys, they have stuck with us. And a lot of them, majority of them actually now are making money. So perseverance at every angle, right from the top to the bottom. Everyone has to believe in the model, and they just have to keep on pushing. There's no looking left or right.
Did you also sometime lose belief in your conviction or had some doubts whether this will work or not?
See, I always knew that long term, we know what's going to happen long term. But how long is that going to be? Because what would happen is we would take a step forward and there would be 2 steps back. And this has been a constant. Even now, I mean, with the policies and everything, so we take 1 or 2 steps forward and then there's a couple of steps back. So it's not that I lost faith or hope, but it was always, there's this concept, what they use in Harvard, which is kill the dog. Kill the dog. So at some point of time, you've got to realize where to kill the dog. Or at some point of time, you've got to realize where to kill the idea before it engulfs you. So I think we probably didn't reach that stage where it completely engulfed me. So there were lots of times that I said, and I would have my friends telling me, what do you think you're doing? You could be doing something so much better. You could be doing something. But it goes beyond making money. It goes, this whole concept, it's creation of an industry. It's a change. And that's what we are striving for. If it was for making money, there were multiple different options which I could have gone 10 years back and been in a very different space right now. But it's this whole exciting journey, excitement of building a new industry, of coming in from nowhere actually in that manner.
Making money as well as making a difference. Tell me, what is the number one success which you're proud of, and also narrate any one of your failures?
Numerous, too many failures to actually count here. When we started off in 2000, and I thought, that we're going to launch electric bicycles, because what was happening is we had the moped category earlier, and the moped category was diminishing. So for a person at that point who was buying a 1,500 rupee bicycle, he was going straight to a scooter or a motorcycle at 44,000 or 42,000. What happens in between? So we thought, let's give mobility to a person who's on a cycle, who's carrying his family. When you drive, even now, rural India, you see a person carrying with sacks on his cycle, and the cycle lasts him for 20, 25 years. So we thought, why don't we give him mobility? It'll make life a lot easier for him, and that's a great model. We went out, launched an electric cycle, didn't work. The kind of questions that we were asked at that point of time, how long does the extension wire have to be, those kind of things, because people didn't understand it, so education of the people. Second, we didn't realize what was happening because we didn't realize why the consumer was not really adopting it. It wasn't a perfect product. By today's standards, it was nowhere close to perfect or even great quality. But it was a robust bicycle with a lead acid battery. The battery was heavy, no doubt about it, but it gave you mobility. We again launched in 2004. Again, it didn't work. Then we launched electric scooters in 2007. And that's where the market started shifting completely. And that's where we realized our mistake that India, a consumer, is very different from any other consumer around the world. Now, I'll tell you, for him to go from a cycle to an electric cycle is it's not, there's no growth. He's actually going backwards because for him, he's going into a product which is assisting him, which is against his strength or power. But for him to go from a cycle to a scooter, no matter what performance of the scooter, it's an increase. He's rising up in the strata. And from there, he would go to a motorcycle and then he would go to a car and so on and so forth. So what we didn't realize, we were so caught up on giving him a product which is going to ease his use or is going to be comfortable for him, we overlooked the fact of aspirations. And that's a very, very important factor. And we've seen numerous companies, foreign companies coming in and failing on this account. And we as an Indian company who'd been there for 50 years already, and we thought we knew the consumer very well. But yet we were unable to catch that part of the pulse to say that it's for him, he has to graduate up. So that's some of the failures that we had.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So let me probe a little further. See, the failure which you have shared also is not easy to share. So thank you for your disclosure. Thank you for disclosing a failure. However, still it is the easier failure to share. Because it is a failure where invention and failures are bedfellows, or pioneering and failures are bedfellows. So if I have pioneered and I made a judgmental mistake, and so, but thank you for sharing, but it is easier to share than a process failure, where your team goofed up or the organization goofed up, some inefficiency. Can you share anything like that? Which was a big one.
Again, numerous. I mean, there's too many to share like that. There's numerous failures that we've had. Whether it's even hiring, for example. We thought that we're going to get in the best possible people. We're going to get in but what we didn't realize is that just getting in the best people with great fancy degrees, but if they don't have the entrepreneurial spirit, because you are actually fighting on a day-to-day basis on cents and pennies and paisas, you are literally on a day-to-day basis trying to make sure that how do you go to the next day? How do you go to the following day? And that requires a very different skill set. So we made numerous blunders by getting in people who thought that this is a big industry and it's going to be a sunrise industry, so let's jump into it. But for them, it was stepping into the right direction.
That's a great one.
And those people didn't really buy into the whole story and the whole concept, and they fell off along the way. There were numerous people who also came in who we thought they believed in the journey, who we trusted with, but they didn't really perform in any which way. But those are all learning experiences for us.
So excuse me for lingering a little more on this. Anybody made fun of you before we come to success?
Lots. So people would call me crazy, earlier. So I'll tell you this interesting incident. Earlier this year, there was a conference at Hyatt Regency, and so I finished and I was waiting outside. So there was a guy standing to meet me. So he met me and I shook hands with him and I gave him my card. And he says, "You don't remember who I am?" So I said, "I'm sorry, I don't." And I'm extremely bad with names and faces. I'm very good with technology. So I'll look it up instantly and tell you your wife's name and your children's names and what you do and when I met you and exactly. But if I have to remember it, it's a tough one for me. So I couldn't recall who the guy was. So he says, "I met you in, I think, probably 2010 or 11. And at a particular conference." I said, "Okay, great. It's a pleasure to meet you again." And he says, "I want to tell you what I told you that time." I said, "Okay, tell me." So he says, "I told you that you are the most stupid person." So I said, "Okay, you have a right to your opinion." So I said, "Now what do you say?" So he says, "I think you're a pioneer." So he didn't have a card. So I have no clue who the guy is. I've forgotten who the person is. I only remember this incident. And this has stayed on with me. And it stays on with me.
Last I heard, was that this gentleman could have been from the existing conventional engine sector and he's gone bankrupt while the Pioneer is progressing. So anyway, coming to your major success.
I think we've had a fair bit of success. See, what happens is when you're in an industry like EVs, and when you start off as early as we did, there's no path ahead of you. You don't know which way to go. You can't follow an example of what succeeded in China is going to work here, or what succeeded in Europe is going to work here. Dynamics are different. The economic strata is totally different. The governmental push and the government regulations are completely different, and the infrastructure is completely different. So what worked there is not necessarily what's going to work here. And those have been some of the mistakes that we've learned along the way also. But some of the successes, or one of the bigger successes, is for me to be able to hold my team and my network together and yet progress at a time when we were doing no business at all. I mean, the market had come crashing down. This is not too far back. This is about 5-6 years back, where the whole industry was about 8,000 units a year. We had 100 dealers exclusive to us. Now, how do you keep 100 dealers and a staff of about 50 people at that point of time, with a very high paid, with a CEO, professional CEO who's got other options, and your team have other options? How do you really keep them believing in a goal, and how do you keep them believing in a vision which you have, and how do you imbibe that down? I think that's been a tremendous success, because had it not been for the team that we have across, whether it's the suppliers or it's the dealers or it's even my family, there's no question that we would be where we are today. There have been a number of companies who've come in the midst, done very well for themselves in this space, but when the bricks came crashing down, they pulled out. And some of those people were friends. So they tell me, we wanted to continue, but my family would not support me. So the support that we had all through, plus being able to retain all of this and being able to stick through thick and thin, I think has been my biggest success.
That's a great one, and I'll come to that. Your kids never told you that, Dad, this electric vehicle business, is it going to succeed also or not? They never asked.
Now my kids are old enough. So when I started this, my son is now 18. So he now realizes, and he's realized a couple of years back. But what was actually very interesting is a number of years, my daughter is 13. So a number of years back, we all remember that, during our time, Diwali, we used to get loads of firecrackers and burst them, right? We used to go crazy with firecrackers. But now, I don't know if any of you actually, your children allow you to burst firecrackers. So what happened is that the children, that's what they're learning in the school, that firecrackers are not good for the environment, and the pollution and smoke and how it's bad for their generation, etc., all of that stuff. So actually a couple of times, my children would actually come and say that we are glad for what you're doing because you're not polluting the environment. So rather than being a negative, they said, it's not easy. Now my son understands it, but that point of time, they said, we are very happy what you're doing is good for the environment.
So you've told us the now dialogue, but you've skipped the then dialogue, but no problem. That's great. So what is the biggest challenge you feel that e-vehicle industry faces today? And what is the low-hanging fruit for e-vehicles?
Numerous challenges. One of the primary challenge that the industry faces is lack of awareness. People still, if you go beyond the metros, if you go beyond where people are actually following this on a regular basis, the awareness is just not there. So even in our consumer base, we've got about 44% people who are repeat buyers. So new people are not really jumping in the manner which they should. To start with, in the first erstwhile years, there were issues. The batteries were poor, the lead acid batteries, the vehicles itself were not very good quality. All that has changed over the last few years. And that's the nature of any industry, when it comes in. And that's what happened with IC as well. When it came in, the quality has improved dramatically in the last 30 years, 35 years that it's been there. So awareness is one part of it, which is a big hindrance. The second is, at this point, it's a chicken and egg situation. So when I meet with large companies who are automotive suppliers or financiers or other this thing, their point is that first let the market increase, then we will do this. But the market will not increase without them actually taking a step forward. So in a lot of these conferences, what I've actually been telling people is I said, okay, you can continue fence sitting, you can continue waiting for government policy, and you can wait for this market to increase to a certain level. The only thing you should do is just keep your PR alive and just keep on talking about it. Because what that is doing is creating awareness. With that awareness, the market is expanding. So as long as you're talking about it, by the time you want to jump in, maybe either it'll be too expensive for you to jump in, or maybe there's no space in that. We already tied up our vendor base, etc. So that is another big problem because you're not getting the large quality manufacturers, the component manufacturers really taking that leap of faith. There's very few companies who are taking that leap of faith and saying, okay, we believe in it and we will push our way through. The other factor right now, even with the policy, for example, there's confusion. There's utter confusion about the policy. And that has a bearing on in the international markets and on the long term. So companies who are looking at potential joint ventures, investing into you, investing into technologies in India, they are unclear about what is the government policy. Is it 2030? Is it 2025? Or is there no policy whatsoever? Is it even EV? Or is it something else? So there's total ambiguity there. Now, if you look at success in other countries and you try and replicate that there, if you look at China, China was a carrot and stick approach. They actually banned IC in most of the cities. And then they gave you incentive and created an infrastructure. Europe is different. Europe got pulled into EVs because of the environment, and people wanted that mobility without actually damaging the environment. US was for a different reason. India, we're still trying to figure out our roots. I mean, right now, next week, I would say, not even that far, even the next 3-4 days, suddenly there's going to be this whole hula about electric mobility and how we need to move in because the pollution's increased. But come spring, we all forget about it and go back to our own lifestyles. So that is another problem that happens. So we have to have a long-term policy to say that this is where we want to be. These are the milestones. And how we'll let you decide the course on how you want to get there. It's not necessarily for the government to decide on the technologies or for the specifications of what it should be. They should just chalk the path. They should just say that this is the goal and not shift the goal too often. And then keep on observing because you need a push for the beginning, just for the beginning to get that whole momentum, the ball rolling. And then the market forces will take over and take it on its own.
So awareness, quality component, manufacturing and policy are the 3 points which you think are the biggest challenges. And what is the low-hanging fruit in e-vehicles?
See, if you look at India, out of a total population of about 1.3 billion, about 12.5% of them are on two-wheelers, on motorized two-wheelers. About 12% are on bicycles. There's about 30% on who don't commute at all. There's 12% on bicycles, 12.5, 12.7, 12.8% on motorized two-wheelers, which is motorcycles and scooters, and about 4%, 4.5% on four-wheelers. So if you look at the conversion that's going to happen, India actually moves on two-wheelers. It's the biggest two-wheeler market. So when we talk about statistic, what Mr. Shiv Anilji was also talking about, 20 cars per 1,000, etc. The cars is very different, but when you look at two-wheelers, that's a very, very different. That's a very different number. The population, the penetration is very different. It's much higher than most of the parts of the world. So two-wheelers is definitely the low-hanging fruit. Numerous reports. I mean, you look at Rocky Mountain Institute report, or you look at Niti Aayog internal reports, or you look at NEMMP, which came out in 2013. Everything talks about two-wheelers for multiple reasons. One, you don't require the level of charging infrastructure that you require for cars. You don't require the level of standardization of the chargers that you require for cars. And it has got to be, if you look at a pyramid, two-wheelers is the bottom of the pyramid in terms of the volumes. And that is where it's got to rise up. There is no question, and nowhere does it happen, where the top just keeps on taking off and it trickles down to the bottom. It's got to be from the bottom. The localization will come. The battery manufacturing will come. You look at e-rigs, for example. E-rigs is a 1 million unit a year market in India. A lot of them are unregulated, unregistered, very poor quality. But that whole ecosystem has got created now because people are making money out of it. The driver is actually making money out of it. So it makes sense for him. Now that is changing to L5 norms and to e-autos, etc., and now it's battery swapping, which works for e-rigs, but not necessarily for two-wheelers. So two-wheelers and three-wheelers is going to be your low-hanging fruit. Also, if you look at from a price point, the price point of our average cars, mass volume in India, is quite low. At that price point, it's not possible for it to convert to electric. Your batteries are going to be way too expensive. So unless we figure out another way of reducing the battery cost, unless we figure out another way of having the batteries, leasing the batteries or something on those lines, the cars is something which is going to happen. Even in the cars, if you look at, it's possible that the higher end may actually convert faster than the lower end.
As far as government policy is concerned, is it supporting the should it support the indigenous industry a little more and original research? And overall, is the government policy helping you or hurting you?
Tough question, sensitive question. So at this point of time, policy is not really helping. So FAME 2 coming in has actually had a decline in the number of vehicles being sold under the FAME regime, even though the government's doled out a lot of money, they've earmarked a lot of money for it, but it's not worked in that manner for a simple reason that this is, FAME right now is geared towards range and speed. So the more batteries you add onto the vehicle, the more money you'll get. Plus there's a capping that is there on the X works or the X dealer price. So no matter which way you slice it or dice it, your product, in order to qualify for FAME 2, you have to be more expensive. Now, the intent is that intent for the government is to give a better quality product so the consumer has a better experience in terms of the speed and range and to eliminate the fly-by-night, so-called fly-by-night operators. But it's not quite working that way. So that has to change. And there are mistakes, that the government will also make and we will also make and everyone makes. But you have to find course, you have to constantly do course correction. You have to constantly be looking at the milestones to see, have I reached that milestone? If I haven't, what's the reason I haven't reached that milestone? Is there something better that I can do? And so I think now is the time for them to introspect. It's been 6 months since FAME 2 came out. And now they need to introspect on how FAME 2 is working and whether it's working or not. Is it working for the industry or what's really happening? We are totally in for localization, and that's where the government should push as well for localization. But it has to be done in a phase-wise manner. You can't, I said it in my earlier today, that you can't put the cart before the horse. You can't say that I want localization first and then demand creation. The first is to say that, okay, I want to be there, 100% localized in the next 2 years or 18 months or whatever be the time frame. And then this is how I'm going to help you create demand. So when the demand gets created, that ecosystem and localization automatically will fall in place. And EVs also will be like IC. If you look at the IC industry, two-wheelers, there's only 5, 6, 7 manufacturers, not beyond that. But in EV right now, there are tens of manufacturers. Eventually, they'll all die away. As this market increases, as this ecosystem gets created, there'll only be serious players who, when they've penetrated into the deep parts of the country, only they will survive then.
So there were hundreds of players in the automobile industry also in the first couple of years, 500 players. And they shared patents and tools, even other resources. Have you also had any such experience where you have shared with the pioneering community, which is many a time not being able to supply spares, or some vehicle manufacturers end up leaving orphan vehicles because they crash and so on? Have you had that? And after that, I will open up the discussion to the audience.
Yes, we have, and we do that actually constantly. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. One of them is current, which is where we are constantly sharing information. I'm even personally, mentoring a couple of these small startups on how do you really take your product from a lot of these companies where they come from, the tech companies. They are very good with the technology, but they get lost when it comes to the commercials. They get lost on how do you really commercialize the product. So we help them in commercializing the products because the market's big enough. This is not really, it's not about competition, but it's about growing the whole industry. The whole industry does well, we'll do well as a company. monopoly never survives. It doesn't work. So it's got to be in a situation where you've got strong competition, and that automatically pulls up the whole system. I'll give you another example of what happened actually. So EV industry, two-wheelers, 2008-9, it was really beginning, it was taking off. And then came the Lehman crash, the Lehman Brothers, what happened in the West, hit us in 2010. If you remember, at that point of time, dollar went from a 44 to a 74 rupees. Oil crashed from $130 a barrel to about $38 a barrel at that point. And there was a MNRE subsidy which we were getting, which was 34 crores, that finished. These three things resulted in the whole industry crashing. Now, suddenly you had tens of manufacturers or hundreds of manufacturers coming into this. So if you see EVs on the road, so if you see vehicles on the road, you automatically get gravitated towards them. You start buying them. If you see dealerships opening, you start thinking that this industry sector is doing well. A very live example for you is CyberHub. If there was one restaurant here, it would not be a destination. But because there are 30 restaurants here, it's a destination. Everybody comes and everybody does well. That's the way in industry as well. You have more competition, everybody will do well because people will the quality will improve. So at that point, what happened is that when this whole industry collapsed, all the companies started pulling out. And we were requesting the companies not to pull out, but nevertheless, that was their own business model. Majority of these players pulled out. Now, in a neighborhood where you have 5 dealerships, suddenly you're left with 1. Now the people are waiting, when is that one also going to shut down? And what happens to the vehicles that I've bought? So what we did actually at that point is we got competition spares and supplied them to our dealer network because I was told you we had about 100 dealers at that point of time. And there was already a population of vehicles, which is ours plus competition. And so we said, okay, service their vehicles also because we don't want this whole industry to get a bad name. Now, what happened in the process is that we got a good name in the market. The dealer got a very good image in the market. And second, the dealer got some revenue because otherwise the whole market had collapsed. So it worked out as a win-win-win for all this thing and kept the market alive.
Right. So help others so the crusade can continue. So I'll open the chat to the audience. Please, one gentleman here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Munjal. My name is Dheeraj. I'm from Kwai KSL. We've gone into EVs recently. Earlier in the session, you had mentioned about battery swapping. And you'd mentioned that globally battery swapping has not worked except maybe in Taiwan. You had mentioned that. So, given Indian market is very unique, and that gives you the opportunity to separate the cost of battery from the cost of the EV. So my question to you is, specifically in the case of two-wheelers, why do you think battery swapping will or will not work in the long term for the Indian market?
See, in two-wheelers, battery swapping as a model is a doable model when it comes to commercial fleet. Because you've got a fixed route that you're going in. So for example, if it's e-com delivery, you know the runner's running to a particular point, he's coming back to the base station to pick up his material, whatever the goods are, and then he's going out and doing a delivery again. And those people, it doesn't make sense for them to leave their vehicles to charge even if it's rapid charging, it doesn't make sense for them to leave their vehicles for charging because that's loss of revenue. So in that model, battery swapping can certainly work and will work. When it comes to consumers, now consumers, what we believe is we want to give the consumer the option of being able to, in a battery swapping model, you can't charge the battery at home because that's where the revenue of the swapping model comes from. So you have to take the battery from there. There's no way you can charge it at home and you've got to return it back and then take another battery from there. Now what happens in that is if it's a heavy user, then it can still make sense. But if it's a light user and where you're not taking out the battery and you're not taking it up to your apartment to charge, then that is where there is a slight issue. The second is that you're trying to tell the consumer that, here, you don't have to go to a petrol station, you don't have to go to a gas station to go and stand in a queue and replace your battery. But yet, in this case, what you're telling the consumer is that you've got to go to a swapping station to swap your batteries. The third point is that it's, again, a chicken and egg. It may be possible for it to work, but you've got to have a dense enough population of battery swapping stations before you can really come in. So you got to make a matrix of the city, have swapping stations all over the place, put the batteries in place, and then maybe let the consumer decide whether he wants to adopt or not. And last but not the least, there is still no standardization of the size and the form of battery that manufacturers are using. This model has been tried for cars. There was a company, Israeli company called Better Place, which raised millions, hundreds and millions of dollars and went bust. It didn't work there because of the different form factor that comes for cars. Even in two-wheelers, now if you standardize on a particular battery, a size and form factor across manufacturers, that's a very difficult one to do. So one company doing it is doable, but when you've got multiple, then how do you standardize? So everyone's got to be talking to each other, then what is the USP that I have versus somebody else?
Any other question? Here.
Yeah, hi. Rajesh Lumba, EcoRent-A-Car. Just wanted to ask, you said and very nice of you to share all those failures because there's no better learning than from the failures. And, between the last 7-8 years, you're seeing the markets turn the corner. EVs turn the corner. So what's changed? Also in the light of you said what the government's policies are not really helping with demand generation. So what is your strategy to generate the demand? And what has really changed that you think the market's turned the corner?
See, it's not that
And
the
how's and also the aspirational aspects of the Indian consumer, which was had supposedly plays a big part in moving up the value chain, in context of all those.
See, it's not that the government does not want to do demand creation. The government does want to do, and that is why they are earmarking so much of money for Phase 1 and Phase 2. The point is they've made some mistakes along the way. There have been some errors made in the way the policy is structured. Now, if you go deep into it, there is a reason for it, and there's a logic for it. And the logic is to keep certain fly-by-night operators away, or to make sure that it's a serious player, and to give a customer experience, give a good experience to the consumer, etc. So there are numerous reasons why the government decided to go down this route. It's not worked. So like I said, if you take a decision, if you take any policy, if you take any decision, it's difficult when you're taking the decision to say that it's going to be a right or a wrong one. It could go either ways, and especially in a new sector where you're trying to experiment. So that's what's happened here. Now course correction is required here to say, okay, this has not worked, maybe something else will work. In our case, we can't stop because we are now, our business model is based agnostic of what happens with the policies. So we were trying, what we did is a couple of years back, we said, okay, policies will keep on changing and these mistakes will be made. Now, does it make sense to still remain in business or should we pull the plug? If it makes sense in the longer term to remain in business, then you do everything in your power that you can to make sure that you push that industry. So this year, what we decided, for example, is if you look at it, there's our own business model. We could either target the volume, or we could target the top line, or we could target the bottom line. So we said, okay, what should we go for? Should we go for the bottom line, in which case you pull back on the volume because your margins have gone now? Or should we target the top line, in which case you keep on selling the higher range products? Or do you just go for the volume, and top line and bottom line will eventually come. The delta will happen. So we are going for the top and the volume, because that's where if you're expanding the market, eventually you will begin to make money. Our dealer network, for example, I'll just digress from this. When we used to do our dealer conferences, and I used to ask that how many dealers are actually making money, in a conference in a hall like this, there would be probably about 4, 5, 6 people who would raise their hands. Now I have to ask, how many of you are not making money? And there are 4, 5, 6 people who have not raised their hands, or who raised their hands at not making money, including myself. But that's because the dealers have now got population of vehicles around them, where they're coming in for battery swap, replacement, service, the damage to the vehicles, etc., whatever be the case. And they've built that whole ecosystem. So we believe that our model is right, that the way that we're pushing the volumes through, the model is right. And I mean, so...
But do you think you see eco-electric cannibalizing into the the Hero ICE-driven motorcycle and two-wheeler?
See, I wouldn't say cannibalizing. I would say a conversion. So a switch. So as we go along, there is going to be a switch which happens from IC to electric. Now, whether that is going to be in the next 5 years, 10 years, it's difficult for me to say right now. But there is going to be a switch that happens. And there's this whole misnomer about job losses that's going to happen. I've heard this figure, 33 million job loss, etc. That's not going to be the case because you don't have 133 million people working in the engine part of a IC industry. Now, what is going to happen is reskilling is going to happen. If you look at in the last 2-3 statistics, if you look at the last pick up 30 years, and you look at unemployment, modernizations happened in the last 30 years. We've gone from a fax machine to a email, and now we are on WhatsApp and everything. We've gone from the normal taxis to Ubers and Olas, and we've gone into Oyos, and we've gone into FaceTime. There was this whole talk earlier that if FaceTime is coming in, then hospitality sector is going to suffer because people will not travel any longer. Is that the case? That's not the case at all. It's all increased. And if you look at the statistic over the last 30 years, unemployment in India has not increased over these years. It's hovered between 7, 8, 9, 10, that percent, depending on which way you cut it and look at it. So there is going to be no job loss, but there is reskilling which is going to happen. And that is going to happen gradually. It's not going to happen overnight.
Great. Last question here. Okay, one more I'll take. For that.
Hi. So, Mr. Munjal, Dayar Gupta here. You said that, it has to be collaboration. You said that rather than treating them as competition, treat them as collaborators, even as competition, because the entire ecosystem has to grow. Just wondering, do you think there will be a scope for multi-brand showrooms or dealerships? Because when I was in US, I saw that one car dealership sells many brands, which we have not seen in India. But with electric vehicles, where the volumes are small, maybe multi-brand dealerships, can that be an option?
Absolutely. I think there's going to be very different models of selling which are going to happen here. So what you're seeing in Europe, actually, is a large part of the business is switching to online sales. So people are setting up this, and that's what we've done internationally as well, is more experience centers. People come experience a vehicle, but they don't necessarily buy from a dealership. In India, why dealerships still exist, because the margins, one, in India as compared to the West, whether it's Europe or the US, are much lower. And second, you need somewhere to service the vehicles. So just service revenue itself for electric is not large enough to sustain a business. IC is doable. Electric is not necessarily the case. But yes, multi-brand dealerships will happen eventually. Online sales will happen in a much larger way than it's already happening. And we are also, we are selling online as well. And that's a business. So it's going to change. The whole industry is going to change. But what you are certainly going to require is a service network. Because these are, at the end of the day, they may require less service, but it's not no service. There will be breakdowns which happen. You need battery replacements. You need people will have accidents. So you need a service network. And in electric, the advantage is that comparable. If you're selling a handful of electric versus you have to sell many hundred of IC in order to break even for the dealer. And that is the difference, because here it's a much simpler system. You need many less people to service the vehicle, and it's all tech. So you've just got a dynamometer, you plug it into the vehicle, and it gives you all the readings, your batteries and motor and everything. And if your battery is bad, you replace it. If your motor is bad, you replace it. There's no change of engine oil, there's no overhauling of the engine, nothing of the sort. So it's very simple.
Great. Last question there, please. Last question. There was a hand. Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes. My name is Aditya, and I'm from Orange Mantra. So, my understanding from today and my experience over the past couple of years has been that it is more likely that we would succeed in the two-wheeler space for electric much before we would succeed in the four-wheeler space. If we are able to get 90% conversion from the internal combustion for bikes onto the electric space for bikes, how much of our emissions targets would we achieve over the next, say, 10 years? Say we have gone from, we are 90% electric in two-wheelers pan-India, and the four-wheeler space remains the same. How would that affect our emissions targets? And how would that affect a large organization such as Hero, which includes Hero Electric and also Hero, the traditional Hero Motorcorp as a whole?
See, it's difficult to say a combined this thing because we are not a combined company. So it's difficult for me to give you a figure there. But to give you a figure of how much difference it would make, so, okay, let me recall my numbers. If 20% of the vehicles today, two-wheelers, convert to electric today, we would have a saving of 3 billion tons of CO2 per year. So that's the kind of number. Each liter of fuel that you're burning is, hang on, is 2 tons, no, it's 200 kgs of carbon dioxide that gets, or is it 20? I've got the figures. I'm bundling up the figures. But the figure is 20% conversion is 3 billion tons of CO2 emissions would be reduced. Just the two-wheelers alone. And you're right, I mean, in saying that the story is actually going to begin at two-wheelers. And then it's going to flow upwards. And in cars, I'm not even sure whether the answer is electric or is it hybrid of different kinds.
Yes.
So you can do that in cars. But two-wheelers, it's got to be pure electric right now. Eventually may transition into something else, may go into a fuel cell, or it may go into a solid state battery, or it may go into different technologies. But the point is that going forward, it has to be no emission.
So now one of the questions we did not get a full, complete answer from Naveen. So we will expand the perimeter of this discussion and we will bring in her daughter. She's already there with us.
Is she there?
Oh my God.
Okay.
Okay. So, would she be here only? Close by? No, she would. Okay, fine. So anyway, we will park that question for later. But extremely revealing and instructive. In fact, I was, like the top leaders of today, I was trying to coin an acronym from what I have learned, what he has mentioned. So I think the acronym which I have coined is E cube I square. So what does E cube mean? He says education is very important of the consumer. Then education again of the automotive manufacturer to reskill him. Then of the supplier. Then the second point which you said is support to entrepreneurship. That is the 3 E's. And infrastructure, charging infrastructure, and indigenization at a calibrated pace. These are the things which you have said. So this is, I was wanting to make it EIEIO, but it didn't happen. So it's E cube I square from my side. And thank you very much. And thank you very much, Naveen.